Alright guys, so the videos might be getting a bit longer from now on because the end games are getting a bit more in depth here. So here we've got the first end game, I would say, which we're not going to cover in comprehensively because there's just so many variations that they would take forever. We're going to talk about some principles and some key positions to keep in mind when you're defending certain positions. So here we're defending the knight versus rook, with a knight versus the rook, and similar to the bishop versus the rook, as we saw in the last endgame, the last couple of endgames. This position is a draw in most scenarios on the open board. There are positions, however, where white can lose. This position, however, is a draw, as you can see in the table base in the top left-hand corner there. This is a draw, this position, and I call, after check here, I call this the L fork position. This is an important position to remember here. I've written some notes here in the top here after knight f2 check. It's important defending such positions with minimal pieces on the board. What's important to remember is the nature of your opponent's potential checkmating threats. So with black's pieces, the black king and the black rook, the way black is going to checkmate white here is with the black king opposing the white king on the back rank, and with the rook delivering the back rank check. Therefore, to defend this, we either need to get our king off the back rank, or block the back rank with our knight, or stop the black king from opposing us. So here, after king e3, we immediately stop the black king from opposing us with check. And here it's just a matter of, here we're blocking the black rank, so the back rank even, so black can't checkmate us. If the rook goes to the other side, we can play king e1, threatening to go out into the open board. If black plays check here, we can go out into the open board, getting off the back rank. If rook goes back to a2, we can go to king f1. Remember, we're not in danger here. The knight guards the f2 square, and the knight blocks the back rank. With d2, we can go back to king e2. The knight does a good job of defending the e3 square from the king, stop the king opposing us. Rook to d8. We play knight f2 here. Rook e8 check, king f1, and again the black rook can't check us on the back rank because the king guards the e1 square. Rook back to e8. We block the back rank. King g3, king e2. We go out to the open board. So obviously that wasn't a comprehensive look at all of the variations, but just some of the ideas to bear in mind. When we're defending, we either want to get our king off the back rank, get into the open board, or we can block the back rank with our knight, and we also want to stop the black king from opposing us and creating checkmate threats. Obviously, at all times, it's important to look out for, not allowing your knight to get skewered or pinned in a way that means you can't keep it. Here is a tricky situation. The black is winning here. Black to move, rook a1, and you see here what's different from this position and the beginning of this position is that in this position white was to move, so white can go check, and if black king goes here, it's no problem. We can go here, but white had the move here at the start of this position. Here now black has the move, and rook a1 is winning for black. You see white only has two moves, f1 square and f2 square for the king. The knight's pinned, and the king guards the e2 square. So game over. Right, this is a tricky little position, and it's black to play and win here. And again, it's not a series of forcing moves. It's white can play a number of things here. I think I've almost put in every single variation, however. But there's going to be some principles along the way that you can keep to. So here the other thing that we need to do when we're defending the king and the knight endgame is we want to keep the knight and the king together. The knight's an awkward piece. It doesn't have the freedom to move just one square in either direction, and that means that it's susceptible to be corralled on the corner of the board. It's difficult for it to get out of. So that's the fourth little principle we want to keep in mind: keeping the knight and the king together when we're defending. Here, black to play, the quickest thing to do is rook c4, quickest way to win. And the green squares here highlight the moves that lose very quickly for white. Obviously king f1 loses to rook c1, checkmate. Obviously king d1, d2 or d1 loses immediately to rook d4, check, picking up the knight. Obviously the knight can't go to either of these two squares or either these two squares, the e3, f4, c3 or c4 square, because the rook picks up the knight. Also the c7 square, because the rook takes it, and the e8 square, because of the skewer here. And the rook picks up the knight. So, back to the most difficult, or the longest way that white can prolong the game, as you see from the table base, is knight b6. And here we can play rook b4. And again, we can highlight some squares that the knight essentially immediately can't go to. Here. We can also add to that, however, the squares d5 and d7. If the white knight goes to either of these two squares, black can go rook check. Again, the king can't go to d1 or d2 because of the skewer. And after king f1, we play the nice rook d4. And again, we're double attacking the knight and the checkmate square here. White prolongs the game with knight c3, but we can play rook d3. And the knight has to move from the guard of the d1 square. If it plays knight e2, we play rook d1 checkmate. Knight d1, obviously we pick the knight up with checkmate. e1 is checkmate. King e1, rook takes c3 is the longest way to play. Knight d7 is slightly trickier. After rook e4, king f1, rook e6. And now I've highlighted again the squares the knight cannot move to. Obviously b6, e5, f6, because the knight falls instantly. Knight f8, and we can play rook d6 here, and the knight's essentially trapped. After king h7, king g4, the knight can't get out here. Can't go here. This is back to where it came from. King here. So we corral the king, the knight even into the corner. So the other move is knight c5 after rook b6. This leads actually to quite a long variation. Sorry, rook d6 is the way to win. I played rook c6 by mistake. Rook c6, knight d3 is a bit of a mistake, because after rook c3, knight e1 comes with a check, and that's actually a draw. So rook b6. If the king plays e3, e1. If the knight just moves here, we play check. And knight e1, we play king e3. So after rook b6, king e1 is the best way to prolong the game. And now king e3. And one thing I want to point out for you is the coordination of the opponent knight and the defending king here. And this is important. After king d1 here, we have rook d6. And again, you see the king can't go to either of these two squares because the rook pins the knight. And after king e1, we can play rook c6. And we're double attacking the knight and x-raying the c1 square. Knight b3, rook c3, and again the knight has to move and allow checkmate. So knight d7 here is out after knight b6. So then we have knight a8 is a short example. We just have rook b7 here, completely trapping the knight. And after this, obviously the king can't go any further because the rook got all these squares. King c4, and then rook a7, and the knight's gone. So as you can see from the table-based knight c8 is the other longest way to win, other than knight d7. And here the table base says rook to b7. Again, these moves to the knight are all out of play. With knight d6, again, look at the coordination of the knight and the king and the opponent's king. Just one file between them, between the defending knight, the defending king, and the attacking king. And this formation is important. And what we do here is we always give a check. Here, the king can't go to d1 or d2. It can never move across. It has to go back to f1, and then rook d7, attacking the knight. And this same method would apply regardless of on what files the pieces were on. When we have this configuration of knight on one file, defending king on the next file, attacking king on the next file, we can give a check. Remember, the king can't go to d1 or d2. King f1 it goes, and then rook d7. X-raying, attacking the knight and X-raying the d1 checkmate square. Knight has to move, we give checkmate. Or the knight doesn't move, we just take it. So after knight c8, rook b7, king d2 is what the table base suggests. Now here we have to be careful when we approach the knight with our king. King e4 blunders knight d6, picking up the rook. So instead of that we play king f4. And now the knight definitely cannot go to d6. It couldn't go anyway, but it can't go for more immediate reasons now. After knight d6, rook d7 picks up the knight straight away. After king c3, say, now we play king e5. And you see how the knight is completely trapped here. The knight has no moves whatsoever. Well, after king c3, we could have actually just played rook c7, winning the knight. But after king e5, you see the king can't go to c2, c3, or c4 again, as we just pick it up. So after king e3, king e6, king d4, king d7, and the knight's trapped. So that was the main line, the longest, most difficult way to win for black. Rook c4, knight b6, rook b4. Again, the knight doesn't want to step onto the d7 or d4 squares, because then look at the configuration again. Knight on one file, defending knight on one file, defending king on the adjacent file, and the attacking king on the next adjacent file. So what do we do here? We give the check, The king can't come across. We play king f1 and then back to attack both the knight and the checkmate square. So we'll always be on the lookout for that tactic and remember it when you're working out what places the defending knight can go to. It can't go onto the d file because it's right next to the e file where the king is on, and the f file where your king is on. So best move for white, knight c8. We prevent the knight from coming to any of the a7, the b6 or the e7 square. It also doesn't want to go to the d6 square because of the configuration again, which would allow us to play rook e7 check. And then rook d7. So we can even call this perhaps the sandwich position, why not? I like giving the positions names so they make them easier to remember. The sandwich position. See the king and the rook and the king sandwiched in between the knight and the king. So after rook b7, king d2, longest way to lose. Make sure you don't blunder king e4, which blunders the fork. So king f4. Now you've got to remember the king and the king and the d6 square are lined up here. So knight can't play d6 again because it would pin it. King also can't go to c3 because of a skewer. So after d3, king e5, and the knight is completely trapped it. You see the king can't go to the green squares. King e3, king e6, king d4, and we've trapped the knight. So rook c4, we're always trying to control the enemy knight, trying to cage it. That's a principle you'll see also in tactics when you're checkmating your opponent. You want to cage the opponent's king before you deliver the final check. Makes it a lot easier to win. So the other slow way to lose, let's call it, is knight f6. And then here the table base suggests rook d4. Again, this controls the white king. It stops it from coming out. We don't want it to come out from behind our king because we would lose checkmate threats at that point. The white king is actually immobile in this position. It can't go to d1 or d2. If it goes to king f1, we deliver checkmate immediately. So here the white king can't move. I've highlighted the squares that lose immediately, the moves that lose immediately for white. Obviously, the d5 or the d7 square, or the e4, the g4 square for the knight lose immediately. The rook takes that. Also, of course, knight e8 loses to the skewer. So we're left with these squares on the side of the board. And so the second principle we think about when you're trying to win this position is you want to keep the knight out of the center of the board. You don't mind the opponent's knight coming out from the center of the board. We also want to keep the king pinned to the back rank if we can, but we also want to corral the opponent's knight away to the edge of the board. You see, after knight f6, we play rook d4. We wouldn't play, for example, rook h4. It'd be a much slower way to win, because we're stopping the knight coming to the edge of the board, which is where we want it to go. Rook d4, a much more effective move. So the three moves that don't lose immediately: g8, h7, and h5. h4, we have rook d6, and again we're stopping the knight from coming towards the center of the board. See, the only square available now for the knight to not be taken is g7. Again, the king can't move, can't go to d1 or d2 because the rook blocks it, and it can't go to king f1 due to checkmate. So king g7. And here now we can start, the engine suggests rook d5, but we can also just play king g4 here. It's very simple. more prosaic way to win. If king g4, if for example knight e8, we skewer. If after king f2, we can push up here with g5, knight e8, rook d7, and the knight is trapped here, every square. So that's the way I would win. King g4, just coming in to attack the knight. You have to remember that the knight doesn't have this square available for it, the check, because of the skewer. So king f2, king comes up, now to guard the f6 square, which will be important next move. Knight e8 and rook d7, and we've completely trapped the opponent knight. G6, king e7, and the knight's lost next move. So other approaches for the white knight, they can play knight h7, and here the table base suggests, and also the most intuitive move I think, is king f4. Only two available squares for the knight. If they go knight f6, I would probably suggest the most intuitive way to win is, in fact, king g5. Knight h7 check, king g6, knight f8, king f7, and knight h7, and then rook g4, you can see, blocks all of the squares of the knight. So once you've got the knight in a corner, as in this kind of corner, or on the edge of the board, the king and the rook can be used together to corral the opponent's knight. And also another principle that you can sort of take advantage of in this position is the principle of improving your weakest piece. See how the rook does a good job cutting off the board here for the opponent's knight here. So we can use our king to keep developing our king and keep developing our king while our rook stays in a nice position. King g6. Rook g7, the knight's lost. There's another way to win. King f2. King f5 blocks this square and this square. The knight only has the f8 square to go to. King e3 kicking the rook, and rook a8, and again the knight's trapped here. King goes to collect it. If knight to f8 try and get out, rook d8, then the knight has to come back in, and the rook goes to collect it this time. We could also play king g6. Last move. And again here, so many really ways to win. Rook d6 is the table-based move, and I like that. The reason being that the knight can't go here or here because the rook takes it. It also can't go here because of the skewer. Check. And next move we're going to play rook e6. But in fact, actually, the best move for white here is knight e7, losing the knight immediately. The reason being because after king f1, that's checkmate. If we imagine the if we imagine that the king was on a different square, we can just play king g4 anyway, and this knight's going to be corralled quite simply. And you can maybe do look at things like this as an exercise, because again, you see how the knight's caged in here. Knight here, king g5. Knight keeps being pushed back. Knight here, king f5. I like. Knight here, king c5, c6. Knight b8. Knight b6. Knight d7. King b5. See. Knight keeps getting corralled. Anyway, I digress. And here we have a position where, again, the knight and the king are disconnected, but fortunately for white, it's his move, and he's in time to play knight b4. Unfortunately, the king isn't quite in a position it might be. It couldn't have been on e3, of course, because the knight would have guarded it. But here, the table base, well, the trickiest move probably is rook c4. I suggest. You see the move, the knight's attacked, it's got to move, and the c2 square, the c6 square are immediately out. The d5 square, if my table base comes up, yeah, as you see. Remember, we've got our sandwich position here. The knight, king on the adjacent file, attacking king on the next adjacent file. What do? We give the check on the file. King has to go to f1 and then back. c3, we just kick it. Knight e3, you can take. Knight d3. Here we can play king e3. And again, because we're threatening the checkmate square here, the game is lost for white. Knight b2 prolongs the game. After knight d1, but we have king d3 even, putting white in Zugzwang. Zugzwang is a German word, by the way, meaning compelled to move, and in this position it means that white's forced to make a move that loses its knight. You're in Zugzwang if you're forced to make a move that you don't want to make, essentially. But anyway, back to our drawing position. So the knight can't go to any of these four squares. It can't go to the c6 square or the c2 square because the knight's lost immediately, and it can't go to the d5 square or the d3 square because that blunders the sandwich position. So as our table base says, knight a2. You wouldn't want to go to knight a6 here, moving away from your king. As the table base says, this position is a win for black. You're essentially trapping yourself here. You see how the knight's trapped into the corner. We could play king e4 here, or even king e3, threatening checkmate. After rook c4, knight a2, this is drawing. And if we try and attack the knight again, the knight just goes back to b4. So I'll say something like king e3, we can go to king d1. After king d3, again we got our L fork position that is nice to remember. When the knight and the king are on the back rank, placed together, with the knight attacking the square directly opposed the king, with black to move, of course. That's important. The knight having just checked into the opponent's king. This is a draw. When the knight and the king are not on the neither one is on the edge of the board, at least. Alright guys, thank you for watching. Cheers.